When we speak of extroverts, of those souls who walk in the daylight of the world, many imagine them as creatures of constant energy, bubbling laughter, and ceaseless motion. Yet I must ask you to listen more carefully, to see beyond appearances. For the extrovert, though outwardly immersed in the chatter of life, carries within them a depth of feeling that is not absent, but rather carefully regulated. The common mind believes that the introvert feels deeply, while the extrovert is a creature of surfaces, but this is a dangerous illusion. The truth is that the extrovert too carries the weight of emotional storms, but their instinct, their psychic necessity, is not to magnify the storm, but to contain it, to prioritize stability over the tumult of inner chaos. What we observe in the extrovert is not a lack of emotion, but a certain covenant with order. Their psyche leans toward the world because it finds nourishment there. Yet, behind this orientation is a profound archetypal necessity. The extrovert soul seeks to anchor itself against dissolution, whereas the introvert may willingly sink into the abyss of inner reflection. The extrovert senses that such a descent could swallow them whole, so instead they become builders of bridges, mediators of conflict, guardians of outward life. It is not that they do not feel, it is that they resist being capsized by feeling. Their orientation towards stability is not cowardice, but a psychic strategy, often unconscious, that preserves their wholeness. Think of the sailor who guides a ship across a stormy sea. The waves crash and the winds howl, but his gaze fixes on the horizon. His hands grip the wheel. His heart beats as wildly as any man's, but he knows that surrendering to panic will lead only to ruin. The extrovert is such a sailor. Within them, the archetype of the navigator is alive not to avoid the storm, but to keep the vessel of the self from being shattered by it. If you call this lack of emotion, you have misunderstood. It is discipline, the discipline of the outer world, which for the extrovert is the field of meaning. But do not imagine that such discipline is always easy or that it comes without cost. The extrovert may suppress inner storms until the body itself begins to tremble under the weight of unexpressed currents. Their laughter may sometimes conceal the silence of an unshed tear. Their endless activity may cover the fear that if they stop, even for a moment, the tidal wave of unprocessed feeling will break through. And so we must not romanticize extroversion nor demonize it. It is a path, as introversion is a path, each chosen not by the conscious ego, but by the mysterious hand of the self, which distributes temperaments as part of the great balance of humanity. I have often encountered in dreams the image of the strong extrovert as a tower built upon a plain. The storms rage around it, yet the tower does not fall. But one must look within the tower, for sometimes the inhabitants are lonely, gazing out through narrow windows, hearing the winds They do not allow themselves to join. Stability may protect, but it may also imprison. Thus, the extrovert's task is to recognize the difference between stability that grounds the soul and stability that entombs it. If they confuse the two, they risk becoming rigid, unable to bend when life demands it. And like all things rigid, they may break. The introvert, by contrast, often dwells in the storm itself. Their world is not the plain but the cavern, not the tower but the abyss. The extrovert avoids being swallowed. The introvert avoids being scattered. Both temperaments are strategies of survival in the face of overwhelming psychic energy. And the great work of individuation calls not for the dominance of one over the other, but for a recognition that each is incomplete without its shadow. The extrovert must one day meet the storm they have avoided, just as the introvert must one day emerge from the abyss they have made their home. Wholeness is not in choosing, but in reconciling. I recall a patient who lived with the ceaseless laughter of the extrovert. She was loved by all, always surrounded by friends, radiant in gatherings, yet when she dreamed, she found herself always in flooded landscapes. Water rose around her house. Streams overflowed. Rivers burst their banks. She would wake in terror, unable to understand why, for her waking life seemed bright and dry. But here the unconscious spoke with unmistakable clarity. Her inner world was drowning in emotions never faced. She had devoted her conscious life to stability, to being the one who held others together, and in so doing, she neglected her own inner tides. The dream forced her to confront the truth. Stability without integration leads to a false foundation. It is not enough to build the tower. One must also walk into its cellars where the water seeps. We cannot, therefore, accuse extroverts of lacking depth. They often carry a hidden burden precisely because they live outwardly. The archetype of the hero, so often projected upon them, demands that they hold their ground. But the hero too must one day descend. Without this descent, their stability becomes brittle, a mask of control that conceals the trembling of the soul. The psyche does not tolerate imbalance forever. What is suppressed will return, often in the form of neurosis, depression, or somatic illness. That is why so many apparently strong extroverts suddenly collapse, as though felled by an invisible blow. It is the reckoning of the storm they refused to acknowledge, and yet, I say again, this is not weakness. It is a human strategy. The self distributes tasks to different souls. Some are called to be the dreamers, others the builders, some the guardians, some the challengers. To be an extrovert is to take up the task of stabilizing the outer world. Without such individuals, society would collapse into chaos. They carry the archetype of the anchor, and without anchors, the ship drifts endlessly. But if the anchor forgets that it too is part of the sea, then it may rust away. forgotten in the depths. The challenge of the extrovert is to maintain stability without denying the reality of the storm. Consider now the symbol of the sun. The extrovert shines outward, radiating warmth, illuminating the world. But even the sun has storms, solar flares, eruptions of energy invisible to the casual eye. Likewise, the extrovert's emotions are not absent. They flare in ways that may surprise even themselves. A sudden anger, an unexpected breakdown, an uncontrollable impulse, these are eruptions of the hidden storm, and if one examines closely, one sees that behind their joy there is often a fear of losing it, behind their stability, a deep desire for inner peace. What appears as endless vitality is often the conscious ego's way of protecting the soul from being engulfed by its own depth. So when you look at the strong extrovert, do not say they lack emotion. Rather, recognize the paradox. They feel so deeply that they have learned to build walls, to regulate, to prioritize outward harmony over inner chaos. Their storms are hidden, but not absent. And it is precisely because they have storms that their stability has meaning, for stability without storms is mere emptiness. But stability in the face of storms is true strength. When we probe further into the mystery of the strong extrovert, we must recognize that the psyche is not divided into compartments of neat logic. It is woven like a tapestry where threads of emotion, intellect, instinct, and spirit intertwine. To imagine that the extrovert is simply lacking in one dimension is to misunderstand the depth of this weaving. What we are truly perceiving is a psychic economy, a distribution of energies determined by forces older than the conscious ego. The extrovert directs energy outward, not because there is no inner world, but because the magnitude of that inner world threatens to overwhelm unless it is stabilized through action, dialogue, and communion with others. It is as if the extrovert knows instinctively that to face the inner flood without a structure would drown them. So they build channels and walls, seeking stability not as denial, but as survival. This preference for stability is itself an archetypal drama, for within each human soul lies the duality of chaos and order, symbolized in countless myths by the sea and the land, the storm and the city, the serpent and the hero. The extrovert embodies the archetype of order bringer, one who tames a storm not by eliminating it, but by building a framework around it. Their laughter, their engagement, their constant presence in the world of men, all of these are strategies for shaping chaos into form. But behind this form lingers the serpent of feeling, the dragon of depth. It is coiled, not slain. To mistake its silence for its absence is the great error of those who judge extroverts superficially. Let us turn to dreams again, for the unconscious is a more honest witness than the waking mask. Many extroverts dream of storms, of earthquakes, of floods. These are not arbitrary symbols. They are the repressed counterpart of their conscious orientation. By day, they create stability. But by night, the unconscious whispers of the chaos that remains unintegrated, the storm in the dream, is not the enemy, it is the shadow, the neglected counterpart that demands to be recognized. In the process of individuation, the extrovert must one day invite the storm into the waking world, must risk the destabilization of their outer life in order to reconcile with their inner truth. Until that happens, their stability will always be provisional, always trembling under the hidden weight of what is unexpressed. The archetypal figure of the king illustrates this perfectly. The king is the stabilizer, the bringer of law, the one who orders the land, but the king who denies the storm, who refuses to integrate the trickster, the prophet, the dreamer, eventually becomes a tyrant, clinging to order until it collapses into sterility. So too with the extrovert, their gift is to stabilize, but their danger is to petrify, to become so identified with being the anchor that they lose contact with the living waters of emotion. Individuation requires that the king listen to the prophet, that the extrovert listen to their inner chaos, however frightening it may seem. Only then does stability become wholeness, not rigidity. Now consider the body, for the psyche is not confined to the mind. Strong extroverts often experience psychosomatic symptoms, stomach knots, tension, headaches, sudden collapses of energy. These are eruptions of the denied storm, when the conscious ego refuses to engage with the depths. The body becomes the stage upon which the unconscious acts. The tremor of the hands, the inexplicable fatigue, the insomnia, these are messages from the repressed emotions demanding acknowledgement. I have seen extroverts who believed themselves invincible suddenly fall ill, and in that illness discover dreams, memories, long buried sorrows. Illness becomes the storm that stability could no longer hold back. And in that breaking, some discover their truest selves. For only then do they realize that their strength was never the absence of emotion, but the courage to finally face it. Think of the myth of Gilgamesh. He was a mighty king, a strong extrovert, radiant in his outward life. Yet it was not until the death of Enkidu, his beloved companion, that he confronted the storm of mortality and grief. Until then, he had lived as though untouched by the deeper tides of existence. But loss shattered the illusion of stability and forced him into the great journey of the soul. So it is with many extroverts, life provides them with stability for a time. But sooner or later, an event, a death, a betrayal, a failure cracks their tower, and the storm rushes in. This is not cruelty, but necessity. Without the storm, they cannot individuate. Without death, there is no rebirth. It is important to understand that the extrovert's stability is not merely personal, but collective. They often act as the pillars of families, of communities, of groups. They are the ones who hold the feast together, who prevent the quarrel from erupting, who bring laughter to ease the tension Their task is archetypal. They carry the spirit of cohesion. But when the pillar crumbles, the whole structure feels it. That is why the extrovert so often hides their pain. They fear that if they falter, others will collapse too. They become like Atlas, holding the world upon their shoulders, yet Atlas too is a prisoner. The world is not meant to be carried by one man, nor emotion by one psyche. The extrovert must learn to share the burden, to trust that others can stand when they themselves bend. Otherwise, their strength becomes a prison, their stability a form of bondage. I have seen this pattern in many marriages and friendships. The extrovert is the one who always steadies, who always forgives, who always smooths over conflict. But in doing so, they silently accumulate resentment, sorrow, and fatigue. One day, seemingly without warning, they erupt a storm, long delayed. The partner, the friend, is astonished. You were always so stable. How could you suddenly break? But this is the hidden danger. Stability without expression becomes repression. And repression eventually seeks revenge. The storm that is not faced consciously will return unconsciously, often with devastating force. This is why I say that extroverts do not lack emotion, they often carry too much of it. But hidden, denied, buried beneath the mask of strength, and so we return to the paradox. The strong extrovert's task is not to abandon stability, for it is their gift, but to infuse it with honesty, to allow the storms within to find channels of expression that do not destroy but renew. This may be through art, through confession, through moments of solitude where tears are allowed to flow. It may be through facing dreams, writing them down, listening to their symbols without fear. The storm must not be banished, but befriended. Only then does stability become living, dynamic, and true. To prioritize stability over storms is a noble instinct, but it must be conscious. If it remains unconscious, it becomes defensive, brittle, easily shattered. If it becomes conscious, it is transformed into wisdom. The wisdom to know when to hold and when to release. The extrovert who learns this becomes a true mediator, a bridge between the chaos of the depths and the order of the surface. They embody the archetype of the wise king who has faced his own storm and therefore governs not from fear but from integration. The world needs such extroverts. It needs their laughter, their ability to gather their power, to build, but it also needs them to be human, to admit that beneath their strength lies fragility, that beneath their stability lies the same storm all of us carry. Only then do they cease to be masks and become whole beings. Only then can they lead, not by pretending to be unshaken, but by showing that true stability is not the absence of storms, but the courage to live through them. If we wish to go even deeper into the mystery of extroversion and its relationship to emotion, we must confront the image of the mask. For the extrovert, more than the introvert, is often compelled to wear the persona, the socially approved face through which the individual interacts with the collective. The persona is not false in the sense of deception. It is a necessary garment, a robe we must wear to meet the world. But when the persona becomes the whole self, when the extrovert forgets that behind the smiling mask lives the storm, then the human soul begins to fracture. The laughter remains, but it becomes brittle. The conversations continue, but they ring hollow. This is why many strong extroverts, in the quiet hours, when the crowd disperses, fall into a loneliness more profound than the solitude of the introvert. They realize that no one has touched the real core within them, for even they themselves have not dared to touch it. Here, the archetype of the actor becomes relevant. The extrovert performs stability with such brilliance that even they come to believe in their role. They act the mediator, the joyful companion, the tireless friend. But when dreams arrive with images of masks, of stages, of voices, echoing in empty halls, the unconscious reminds them that the role is not the whole. To individuate is to step behind the stage curtain, to risk removing the mask, to see whether the emotions they have avoided might destroy or redeem them. This is no easy task, for the fear of destabilization is immense. Yet without this risk, their stability becomes a theater, impressive but ultimately unsatisfying. I once spoke with a man who was a leader in every sense. He organized events, led conversations, carried the energy of his community to the world. He was unshakable, yet his dreams were haunted by wild horses, uncontrollable beasts that burst through fences, trampling the fields. In analysis, he confessed that he feared anger, grief, and despair, so he suppressed them beneath the mask of composure. The horses were his repressed emotions, demanding freedom. His stability was not wrong, but it had become a prison. Only when he dared to let a tear fall in the presence of another did he begin to discover that stability need not mean denial, that strength could coexist with vulnerability. His storms, ens ennemis, became allies, giving depth to his leadership. The psyche does not ask the extrovert to abandon stability. Rather, it asks for a reconciliation. The storm is not evil, it is energy. Without storms, the sea would stagnate, the air would not be refreshed. Without emotion, the human spirit becomes mechanical, a lifeless clock ticking away without passion. Stability, when it becomes rigid, suffocates, but when it breathes with the storm, when it bends and adjusts, it becomes resilience. This is the higher calling of the strong extrovert, not to suppress, but to integrate, to allow their outward energy to be infused with inner depth. Let us consider now the archetype of the tree. A great oak stands firm, rooted in the earth, branches spread wide. To the eye, it is stability itself, but This stability is not the absence of storm. The tree bends with the wind. Its roots drink from waters deep underground, unseen but essential. If the roots are cut off from the storm water of rain, the tree withers. So too with the extrovert, their stability must remain porous, connected to the hidden waters of feeling, otherwise they become like a tree of stone. Et impressive but dead. The individuation process asks them to send roots downward into the unconscious, into dreams, into emotions. They have feared only then can their outward branches truly shelter others without collapsing. The myth of Theseus and the Minotaur also illuminates this dynamic. Theseus enters the labyrinth, the place of chaos, to face the beast within. The extrovert too must one day enter their labyrinth. They cannot remain forever in the sunlight of stability, pretending the labyrinth does not exist. To individuate is to descend into it, to meet the Minotaur of their unacknowledged feelings. At first, they fear that the beast will devour them, but in truth, the Minotaur is not an enemy. It is the repressed vitality of the soul. When faced consciously, it becomes strength, passion, authenticity, Ariadne's thread. The guiding line of consciousness is necessary lest they lose themselves. But without the descent, the extrovert remains incomplete, forever building cities above ground while neglecting the foundations below. It is a grave mistake of modern culture that we equate extroversion with superficiality. This error wounds many extroverts who secretly know that they feel deeply but cannot express it, without risking the collapse of their carefully maintained stability. To accuse them of lacking depth is to increase their repression. Instead, we must honor their role, to bring cohesion, to build communities, to radiate outward energy, but we must also invite them to see that their storms are not shameful. The extrovert who integrates storms becomes a healer of extraordinary power, for they embody both stability and passion, order and chaos. Such a being can stand in the midst of collective crisis and not only steady others, but also feel with them, cry with them, and thereby redeem them. The world itself moves in this rhythm, day and night, order and chaos, stability and storm. To live only in one is to break the cosmic law. The extrovert who clings only to stability is like the day that refuses to give way to night. A sun that never sets. It may seem bright for a time, but soon it burns the earth to ash. The storm, the night, the chaos. These are not enemies, but complements. To individuate is to accept this rhythm, to let the psyche move in waves. Strong extroverts must learn that their strength does not diminish when they cry, when they falter, when they admit the storm. On the contrary, it depends. Their stability ceases to be a mask and becomes truth. We see this in archetypal figures throughout history. The great generals who led armies with unshakable resolve, yet wept when they lost a comrade, the rulers who maintained order in their lands, yet turned to poets and mystics to remind them of the soul. These figures endure not because they denied storms, but because they embraced them in hidden moments, allowing their humanity to break through the armor of stability. In their example lies the secret for every extrovert. Stability must not be a denial of storms, but a vessel for them. As we move deeper into this reflection, I ask you to imagine the strong extrovert as a dancer on a rope stretched across an abyss. On one side is chaos, on the other rigidity. Their art is to move with grace, to maintain balance without falling into either. The rope trembles, the winds blow, but the dance continues. It is not the absence of fear that sustains them, but the rhythm of movement, the willingness to adjust, to sway, to step lightly. Stability is not the refusal to move, it is the art of moving without collapse. And this art is learned only by risking the storm. So when we encounter strong extroverts in life, let us not diminish them by calling them shallow or unemotional. Let us see the masks they wear not as deception but as necessity. Let us remember that behind their laughter may lie unspoken grief. Behind their calm may hide suppressed rage. Behind their strength may live a storm waiting to be embraced. And let us encourage them gently to face that storm, to allow themselves to feel, to weep, to rage, to love without restraint, for only then will their stability cease to be a fragile tower and become a living, breathing temple of the soul. If we are to complete this meditation on the strong extrovert, we must move beyond description into transformation. The extrovert's journey is not merely about surviving storms, but about learning to alchemize them into wisdom. This is the work of individuation, to take the opposites, stability and chaos, joy and sorrow, light and shadow, and bring them into union, so that the soul no longer flees from itself, but embraces its totality. The extrovert who accomplishes this is no longer just a personality type. They become a symbol of the self, a living testament to the possibility of wholeness. Let us imagine the storm as the archetype of Dionysus Wild, ecstatic, overflowing with the energies of life and death. The extrovert fears this god, for his presence threatens the carefully maintained order of their outward life. But to deny Dionysus is to deny vitality itself. To live only under the rule of Apollo, the god of order and clarity, is to suffocate. Yet to be swallowed by Dionysus without Apollo is to be destroyed. The task of the strong extrovert is to allow these two gods to converse within their soul, to permit Apollo's stability to host Dionysus' storms without banishment. When this reconciliation occurs, the extrovert's laughter is no longer just a mask, it becomes sacred joy. Their gatherings are no longer distractions, they become rituals of communion. Their stability ceases to be brittle, it becomes luminous, infused with depth, This is why extroverts who undergo individuation often become extraordinary guides for others. They are no longer merely the life of the party, they are carriers of life itself. Their stability is now rooted in the soil of the unconscious, and so it can withstand storms without denial. They become like shamans in the collective, bridging the world of light and the world of shadow, and people sense it. They sense that this extrovert is not merely smiling to please, but smiling from a place of truth. They sense that this stability is not a defense, but a gift. Such individuals change the atmosphere of a room without speaking, for their very presence radiates the balance of storm and calm reconciled. It is important, however, to acknowledge the cost of this journey. To integrate storms is to risk destabilization. The extrovert who finally admits their loneliness, their grief, their unspoken rage, may feel as though their world is collapsing. The friends who depended on their endless cheer may not understand. The structures they built may tremble. But this collapse is not destruction. It is initiation. Just as the seed must break its shell to grow, so must the extrovert break the mask of stability to find true strength. In that breaking, they discover that the storm they feared is not an enemy but a teacher. It brings humility, authenticity, and depth, and once they pass through it, their stability returns, but now as resilience, not as denial. In dreams, this process often appears as the house that floods but does not fall, or the ship that survives the tempest, scarred but stronger. These images reveal that stability is not lost when storms arrive, it is deepened. The psyche is showing the extrovert that they can endure chaos without dissolving, that their tower has foundations beyond their conscious ego. They learn that their true stability comes not from holding everything together alone, but from being held by the greater self, which encompasses both storm and stillness. This is a mystery. When the extrovert surrenders to the storm, they discover a stability greater than the one they defended. It is no longer their ego's fragile control, but the self's eternal ground. I recall another patient, a man who had built a successful career surrounded by constant activity and admiration. He seemed invincible, yet he was haunted by a recurring dream of a bridge collapsing beneath him. At first, he resisted analysis, insisting he must keep everything intact, but eventually he faced the truth. His marriage was crumbling, his friendships shallow, his health declining. He wept for the first time in years, and in those tears, he found not weakness, but freedom. The dream shifted. The bridge still trembled, but now beneath it ran a river, flowing steadily, carrying him even when the bridge gave way. The unconscious had revealed that he was not alone, that the self sustains where the ego fails. He emerged from that process not less strong, but more. His stability was no longer a mask, it was a trust in the greater rhythm of life. This is the final message I would give. Strong extroverts, you do not lack emotion, You carry it in secret, in silence, beneath the mask of stability. But your calling is not to suppress it forever. Your calling is to allow the storm to enter, to let your stability be tested, to discover that what you feared will not destroy you, but will transfigure you. You are not meant to be empty towers on plains, nor actors forever on stages. You are meant to be whole beings, rooted like trees, radiant like suns, dancing like sailors who master storms, not by denying them, but by steering through them with courage. When you realize this, your life changes, your laughter deepens, carrying both joy and sorrow. Your gatherings become spaces of authenticity, where others dare to be vulnerable because you have dared first. Your strength inspires not because you never falter, but because you falter and rise again, stronger, more human, more divina. You embody the archetype of the reconciler, the one who unites opposites, who shows the world that stability and storm are not enemies but partners in the great dance of the soul. And so I say, do not envy the introvert their depths, nor let others mistake you for shallow. Your depth lies in your courage to face storms without abandoning your role as stabilizer. Your individuation lies not in fleeing your nature, but in fulfilling it more fully, with honesty, humility, and wholeness. Then you will see that your stability was never about avoiding storms, but about carrying their energy in a way that brings life, not destruction. You will discover that you are not a mask, not a tower of stone, but a living soul, radiant and resilient, woven from both calm and chaos, order and passion. You will discover, in the end, that stability and storm are one, and that in their union lies the eternal self.